Uh-oh. Looks like we might have a Mustang that wants to play. Bye-bye, Mustang. Today at Speedy's Garage, we're going to be performing a quite significant brake upgrade onto our Project Challenger Orange Crush. The upgrade I went with is a Baer Pro Plus system. I chose it for several reasons. Number one, you get 6-piston calipers, but they'll actually fit with your stock wheels. You get a 14-inch rotor that is both drilled and slotted, and it's a 2-piece rotor, meaning it cools faster under hard braking. One rotor, caliper, and included brake pads weigh 29.5 pounds. I'm curious how that'll compare to the stock setup on this RT Challenger. The kits are sold separately for front and rear because not everybody is going to want both. The majority of your brake performance comes from the front brakes, but as you guys have heard me say on a lot of my videos, I'm pretty anal and I didn't want the rear brakes to not match, so I went ahead and got the rear set to go with it. The kit is really complete. Like I said, you get the 2-piece rotors, calipers obviously that are billet. They're actually pretty light. You get stainless steel brake lines for the front. The rear reuses the stock brake lines. You get some instructions, some stickers, some adapters for the rear brakes, a syringe to bleed some fluid out of your master cylinder reservoir, license plate bracket if you're into that kind of thing, and a catalog. The kit actually uses the exact same caliper and rotor on the rear as it does on the front. Now, one very important thing you need to check before you pick out any brake system for your car is determine what will actually fit. If you go online, for example, to Baer's website, you can find these templates and you just print them out, and then I glued mine to a piece of construction paper to make it a little bit more rigid, and you can basically determine, you lay this, take your wheel off, flip it over to where you can see the hub. There's where your hub would go, and you would lay it in the wheel and make sure you had clearance all the way around. Now that my parts are actually here, I've just slid the caliper over the rotor and laid it into my front wheel, and you can see I've got plenty of clearance around. That's one of the great benefits of this Pro Plus system. You don't have any fitment issues. And this is what I was saying about using the template to check your fitment. Just set it like that, and if your template clears, you're good to go. The area you're going to have the most fitment issues is where your wheel spokes come into contact with your wheel hub. So that's the area you want to really check the closest. To take care of this project, I've got some WD-40 handy. I'm going to use my electric impacts like I always do. A good assortment of metric socket wrenches, needle nose pliers, a torque wrench. I'm going to use my battery powered ratchet, screwdriver, and probably a few other things. You're definitely going to want to grab a little bit of brake fluid to top the system back up when you're done bleeding it. I went with the Willwood 600 Plus. It's a high performance brake fluid that's going to be great for this type of application. So that's everything I know I'm going to need. I'll mention the additional tools as I come across them during the install. To start the project, you want to get the car jacked up so you can get the tire off, and always use a jack stand for safety. Once you have the wheel removed, you need to loosen the clamp that holds the factory brake line. I'm going to use a pry bar to do that. And you just want to gently pry up on the tab to get it loose. You have to work it a little bit at a time. And the idea is to get it loose enough where you can actually take the brake line out of that bracket. So it took a little persuasion and a shot of WD-40, and it'll pop right out. Next, you want to loosen the hard line, and you want to use a line wrench for that. And it will help to put some tension on the back side of this to keep it in place. And once you get it loosened up, Baer included a little rubber cap for the line so that your fluid doesn't all drain out while you're working. So you want to put that over the end of the line once you release it. I'm going to put a rag down to make sure I don't make a big mess. Takes just a little finesse to get it on there, and then that will cap the line up. and keep you from leaking fluid while you're trying to work. Next, you want to remove the factory brake line retainer. And then you can just remove the hose. It's going to have some fluid in there, so make sure you've got a rag to catch it. Next, you need to remove the two caliper bracket mounting bolts. They are 18 millimeter. They're on the back side. You may have to loosen a little 10 millimeter bolt that holds that brake hose bracket to kind of move it out of the way a little bit to give you some room. And now you can just remove the caliper and the rotor on the car. With the front brake caliper removed, I went ahead and actually tore off a piece of nitrile glove and zip tied it on there to save any fluid from leaking out, because remember, this thing is still full of fluid, and that just zip tied the line in place, and that way I can box it up and keep it. Remove the 10 millimeter bolts that hold the bracket in place on the Baer caliper and remove the bracket. Now you can bolt it to the car. When you're installing the bracket, you want to pay attention to the orientation of the relief. It goes on the back side. The flat side will be on the front facing you, and obviously your two connector tabs will be facing towards the rear of the car. This is installed using the factory 18 millimeter bolts that held the factory brake caliper to the car, and you torque them to 85 foot-pounds. Next, install the rotor and use one of the lug nuts to hold it in place. You may need a washer to give the lug nut enough room to seat against the rotor. Mine are aftermarket, so mine will hold it just fine. Now you're ready to install the Baer 6-piston caliper. You want to remove the little brake hose cap. You want to keep these in case you ever have to send these in for service or have a problem. You can cap these calipers back up and you won't leak fluid everywhere. And then you just slide it over the rotor and let it seat on top of the tabs and install your 10 millimeter bolts. Torque the bolts to 85 foot-pounds. The boxes for these calipers are marked with the proper side and location, but you know you've got it right when the bleeder screw's at the top. Next, we want to install the Baer stainless steel brake line using the supplied banjo bolt and copper washers on each side. Connect the brake hose finger tight, and then Baer includes a little idle clamp to hold the hose in place, and it attaches to the 10 millimeter bolt that held your original bracket in place. And I had to use a rubber mallet to reshape this bracket and the tabs after I pried it open. And you'll want to note that the brake line bends away from the caliper. And again, you just want to do it finger tight to get everything set like you want it. You'll go through your idle clamp, got it in place with the 10 millimeter stock bolt, and now we're going to move on to connecting up our hard line. Tighten the Baer 15 millimeter banjo bolt to 20 foot-pounds. After you've torqued the caliper banjo bolt to 20 foot-pounds, install your hose retainer clip, get it started, give it a few light taps with a rubber mallet until it seats flush with the hose. And you may need to follow up with a screwdriver on the edge there to get it fully seated. And the next part you want to move pretty quickly with. When you remove the vinyl cap from your hard line, it'll start to leak fluid. So you want to quickly attach it to your stainless steel Baer brake line, and then use a 13 millimeter brake hose wrench on the top. Not that way. And a 12 on the bottom. And tighten these up until they're nice and snug and you're not getting any leaks. Take note that it can leak under here as well, so you want to make sure it's nice and tight there and here. And like I've mentioned a couple of times, you want to make sure the banjo bolt on the caliper has already been tightened, because fluid will start to flow through this line and you'll get a leak at the caliper if you're not watching. And finally, you want to tighten your hard line to 20 foot-pounds, and you might have to use one of these Crowfoot 13 millimeter adapters to do that. And it's a little tricky. I can't show you on the video because it's hard for me to get my hands in there with the camera, but that's how I did it. The important thing is tighten it enough to where it's very snug and not leaking. If you can't get a torque wrench in there, or you're going to jeopardize bending or breaking this hard line, just tighten it snug until you don't get any more leaks. Let it set about 10 minutes and then check it really well and make sure you're not getting any weeping whatsoever around the fittings. So that's the front done. Just repeat that same procedure for the other side. The rear is pretty much the same process. I've got the weight of the car on a jack stand for safety, and the jack just providing a little bit of support just in case, and a drain pin underneath the caliper for any fluid that happens to drip. Next, you want to remove the two 18 millimeter caliper mounting bolts, and they're attached to this bracket right here. Don't remove the actual caliper bolts themselves that attach it to the bracket. You want to actually get the bracket and the caliper off the car as an assembly. And with those two bolts removed, you can just wiggle the caliper assembly off the car and set it up, or put a bungee cord around it and hold it in place so there's no tension on the brake hose. And with that out of the way, the rotor will literally just slide off the car. Just like that. Now make sure when you're doing this step that the parking brake is disabled, otherwise it's pressing against the rotor and you won't be able to get it off. So disable the parking brake for this step. Next, you want to install the new Baer rotor, and they're marked left and right, front and back like I've said before, but take note that the rear one has the drum in it for the parking brake, and mine's marked left and right. Yours should be as well. And use one of your lug nuts. I'm going to put mine on the top to hold it in place. Now these are aftermarket lug nuts, so these will run right down without any trouble and hold the rotor snug to the hub. I'm actually going to use two to make sure it's flush. But if you have your stock lug nuts, you may need to use a washer or something as a spacer to line that up. Next, you want to install the caliper mounting bracket, and it has some reliefs in it to go over the ears on the hub to allow you to insert the 18 millimeter bolts that you took off the stock caliper bracket. So that's how it's going to look once you get it on there, and I just snug these down finger tight for now. Next, there's a small aluminum adapter, and it goes on the back side of the rear Baer caliper. It goes through with this 13 millimeter bolt facing to the rear of the car. There's a copper washer between the bolt and the aluminum bracket or adapter, as well as the aluminum adapter and the caliper. So there's how to mount to the car. You want that facing rearward, because that adapter will allow you to just simply take the stock brake line, remove it from your stock caliper, and attach it to the Baer caliper. This bolt gets tightened to 15 to 20 foot-pounds. but you may want to wait until you have the stock brake line connected to torque that bolt down. Now we're ready to install the caliper. Make sure you got a set of pads loaded in the caliper and that they're pushed all the way back against the housing. Remember that your bracket should already be attached, and then you just simply ease the caliper over the rotor and install your 10mm hex bolts. And I'm just going to do them snug for now. And now we need to remove the 13mm bolt that holds the factory brake line to the rear caliper and transfer it over to that aluminum adapter I showed you earlier. The trick here is going to be that as soon as we remove this bolt, fluid's going to start draining from that line. So you have to work reasonably quickly, and you want to keep an eye on your brake fluid reservoir to make sure it doesn't drain dry. Now if you do this efficiently, you should take about 30 seconds to move it over, snug it up, stop the leak, and you'll be good to go. If you start fighting with it, which can happen, you want to stop at some point or have a buddy check your reservoir and keep it topped up until you get this block attached to the adapter on the back side of the caliper and there's no more drips. Okay, this was a little bit of a strange part of the install, just because until you see it, it doesn't make a lot of sense and it's hard to describe. What you're looking at is the factory brake line, and it connects to the Baer adapter right here. All you do is remove the factory bolt, and that's a 13mm banjo bolt here, and there are copper washers on each side of it that you need to reuse. So on the factory caliper, that bolt runs from front to back, so the head of the bolt is on this side of this block. All you do, take the bolt out, make sure you catch your washer, flip the bolt around, put it in this way, put your washer over it, and connect this block with that banjo bolt to the Baer adapter. And that's what it will look like when you get it all hooked up. You don't have to twist the brake line or do anything else, and then tighten both of those bolts. This one's 13mm, and I think I incorrectly said this one's with 13mm earlier. This one's actually an 11. So 15 to 20 foot-pounds on those. Check for leaks. When you don't have any, you've got it tight enough and you're good to go. I had quite a bit of trouble getting to this factory 13mm bolt. It's real close to the mounting bracket for the Baer caliper, as well as the factory parking brake cable. So I ended up just having to use a standard box-end wrench on it, 13mm, and I did it based on feel for this 11mm bolt with the torque wrench. And I just tightened it till it was snug, and I turned it about another quarter or a half turn, and then I'm checking for any leaks. It's been about 15 minutes. I don't see any weeping or anything, so I know it's good to go. Next, torque the 18mm bracket mounting bolts to 85 foot-pounds. And now tighten the 10mm hex bolts to 85 foot-pounds. So that's all there is to installing these brakes. Now you can just remove your lug nuts holding the rotor in place and reinstall your wheel and lower the car. Now that you've got all the calipers installed, you need to bleed the brake system. Hook up the included clear vinyl tube that Baer has in the kit to the nipple on the caliper furthest from the master cylinder. On the Challenger, it is the passenger side rear that you're going to start with. Once you have that hooked up, you're going to need a 10mm brake line wrench. You don't want to use a regular 10mm. You notice how that one's kind of boxed in? It will protect the bleeder screws and the lines. You always want to use the right tool for the job, and this is the one. And you're going to slide it over your tube and get it positioned on the nipple so that you can release it when you either have a partner in the car depressing the brake pedal. That'll be depress the brake pedal one time. When you release that, they will hold the brake pedal to the floor until you tighten it back. That means the brake system is closed, and you'll repeat this process until you don't get any bubbles coming out of that line. However, I put together a tool from some plumbing parts at the hardware store which allow me to connect a regulator and shop air. And you don't want to run more than 15 to 18 psi into your brake system because you don't want to cause any problems, but 15 to 18 psi is fine. I do that with just a regular regulator. That pressurizes the brake system, so now all I have to do is crack the bleeder screw and the system will bleed itself without me having to have a second person in the car pumping the brake pedal. And when they're properly bled, that's what you want to see. A nice solid stream of fluid coming out of the caliper. And then just tighten your bleeder screw back up and move on to the next one. Be careful to wipe off the area around that bleeder screw and be sure to replace the little rubber cap that came on it. It's to protect it and keep it clean. And brake fluid does eat paint, so clean up really well after you're done. The Baer instructions suggest to tap the caliper with a rubber mallet or small wood block to dislodge any additional air bubbles that may be trapped. So we'll go ahead and do that for good measure. And as you're bleeding the calipers, come back and check your master cylinder after each one. The last thing you want to do is let that thing run dry and screw up your anti-lock brake system. So I keep topping mine up to the max line just to make sure it stays happy. So that's the install. I did have to go back and bleed the brakes a couple of more times to get them to where the brake pedal was firm. If you hop in the car and fire it up and you depress the brake pedal and it feels spongy, it means there's still a little bit of air in the system somewhere. You may have to bleed them a couple of times to get all the air out. Once you're confident the brake pedal is as it should be, take it for a test drive in a safe location until you're confirmed that the brakes are working properly. Okay, you'll remember that the Baer brakes weighed 29.5 pounds, the factory brakes, the front, weigh 34.5, and the rear factory brakes weigh 23.5 pounds. So I've had the brakes installed on the car for 5 or 6 days per the Baer instructions, and I've just been driving it around town doing some normal city driving to break in the system. After that, they have a pretty specific rotor seasoning and pad bedding procedure that they want you to follow. It's a 3-day process if you follow the instructions explicitly. I decided to do that because, let's face it, the brake systems, they are kind of expensive, so I want to get the maximum performance I can out of the brake system itself. So I figured the people that engineered it probably have the most knowledge of how it should be set up. It involves several days, like I said, of going out and you miles an hour 3 or 4 times just gently to bring the system up to operating temperature, and then they have you do a series of medium stops down to about 15 miles an hour from 60. They have you do a series down to 15 miles an hour harder, and then you park the car for a day, let everything settle, get back to ambient temperature, and then they have you go back out a second day and perform the same procedure, only this time at the end you perform 6 full-on, very hard stops, but not to the point of engaging anti-lock brakes. You don't want to get the anti-lock brake system engaged, and you definitely don't want to come to a full stop when you're performing this procedure, because you don't want the pad material to end up embedding on the rotor and causing you some vibration problems down the road. So whenever you're doing it, never come to a complete stop. In between the medium and the medium hard stops, they have you go out and drive the car. You know, you make 4 stops in a row, then you drive the car for 5 minutes to cool everything down. Then you come back, and when you do your 6 full-on, get on it as hard as you can stops without engaging ABS, they have you drive the car for 10 minutes without getting on the brakes. So you want to be extra sure that you're in a very safe, controlled, private track area. You want to give yourself some runoff room just in case the brakes happen to fade. If they're going to, that's probably when it's going to happen. When I did it, I didn't notice much fade, if any at all. And even after 8 extremely hard stops in 95-degree weather, the brakes still felt 100 times more powerful than the factory brakes did on this RT Challenger. And what those 8 hard stops are designed to do when you're bedding the brakes is it actually transfers some of the pad material onto the rotor. And that allows you to have the highest coefficient of friction between the 2 surfaces and will greatly improve braking performance. And honestly, after I performed that procedure, the brakes do have more bite to them as I start easing down on the pedal. I mean, they were good before, but afterwards they were phenomenal. I mean, it'll just about pull you out of the seat. You have to be ready for it when you stomp on the brakes pretty hard in this car now. Now, as you've seen, these are the Baer brakes that are on this car. You obviously want to follow your manufacturer's brake bed-in and rotor seasoning procedures if you don't happen to have the Baer system. Each manufacturer is going to have their own thing they want you to do, and they are going to know best of what their brakes would like as far as a setup procedure. So be sure you follow your own instructions if you have something other than the Baers like I do. So here's what the 3 stops look like with the Baer brakes. As you can see, the Baer brakes have a much harder initial bite than the factory brakes. As a result, I had to be much more aware of the ABS system kicking in with the Baers than I had to be with the factory system. I went back and did further testing, and the car will consistently stop in 100 to 105 feet with the Baer brakes if I can avoid ABS. That's a huge improvement over stock. So that's the Baer Pro Kit brake install, pad and rotor seasoning and bedding procedure, as well as real-world tests to see what was actually gained in braking performance. These brakes are an excellent choice as they're simple to install, high quality, have all the features you'll likely want in a performance brake system, and fit with just about any wheel. Wheel fitment was one of the big issues I came across when picking out a big brake kit, and Baer found a way to give us a solution that works great. Pedal feel is nice and firm, and normal stops take little more than my toe on the pedal. The upgraded performance doesn't come at the expense of more unsprung weight either. The entire Baer brake kit, front and rear, weigh only 2 pounds more than the factory brake system. Other than the supercharger, these brakes have been the most noticeable upgrade I've made to the car in terms of driver experience. If you'd like to see more projects and how-to, visit my website, www.speedysgarage.net.